Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and this presentation is titled Thunderbird Crash September 14th, 2003 at Mountain Home Air Force Base. Not the way to end your day. Well, this was one very lucky Captain Chris Strickland. Now, 31-year-old Thunderbird number 6. This is an amazing photo. In fact, it was released before the Air Force clamped down on everything, and it got in the public domain. So it's kind of like it's gone, it's out there. Too bad. But this photo is so good. You'd think it was photoshopped. It's kind of interesting because he punched out coming out of a split S, and I'll explain all this in just a second. But he punched out 140 feet above the ground, pulling max capability of the aircraft for its speed and condition, etc., and 0.8 of a second before it impacted. Now, the interesting thing they always told us that, and maybe this is the older ejection seats, maybe this seat was more capable, but they basically said, hey, if you couldn't pull out with the aircraft, and it was a fully functioning aircraft, if you were in a steep dive and you couldn't pull out with the aircraft, the seat wasn't going to get you out because it could not exceed the capability of the aircraft. In a situation like that. So if you didn't make it with the aircraft, you weren't going to make it out. But this kind of went against that philosophy because he was able to punch out, and apparently the aircraft wouldn't have made it. Yeah, maybe it would, maybe it not. He was really close. It's hard to tell from the picture the true descent rate, but on the video it doesn't look quite that bad. And I'll get to the video in just a minute. All right, so I'm back there, out there at Edwards back in the late 70s, and the F-16 is a brand new airplane, and we're doing the flight test on it and stuff like that. And, didn't realize at the time that this aircraft, back in the late 70s, it would be adopted by the Thunderbirds for use in 1992 and continue to the current time of early 2024 as the Thunderbird aircraft. I mean, it's an absolutely beautiful aircraft. It's great for the role. They like to have a frontline fighter, and this sure is. I mean, it's a great fighter. They had the T-37s for a while, and yeah, they're fuel efficient. And that was the reason back in the old energy crisis day. But most people don't think of trainers as the real Air Force mission aircraft. You want to come out there to the air show and see a fighter fly, because that's what all little kids want to be, like me. You want to be a fighter pilot, and you want to see these airplanes, and they're big, they're impressive, they're loud, they're noisy, and they just look like a joy to get your hands on. Now let me tell you about Steve Anderson. Steve Anderson was the Thunderbird lead from 94 to 95, and you may notice this, he signed it the co-pilot from hell. Well, I upgraded to the Airbus 320 in 1997. Steve had been the commander, like I said, from 94 to 95 of the Thunderbirds, and I come into class, and I sat down next to my stick partner, my co-pilot. They teamed us up on the airplane with captain and co-pilot together, because that's how you'd function as a crew. So it was great. And I sit down, and I notice he has a flight bag open. I see this little business card taped to it, and it's got Lieutenant Colonel Steve Anderson, Thunderbird number 1. And I look at that, and I go, "Is that you?" And he goes, "Yeah, boss." And I go, "Cool." So my co-pilot was Thunderbird lead. Now, okay, you can't get better than that. Now that was a lot of fun. Now I must admit, see, when I was going through training as a co-pilot, I hit the books. I studied. That was one of my strong points. I could really get in the books. I knew the little numbers and stuff like that. So we would get into the quiz portion, and they'd ask a question, and I'm sitting there with the captain, and I'd fire out the answer immediately. And finally, the DC-10 captain I was going through as a DC-10 co-pilot, he finally says, "You're telling the answer before I can even go over the question in my head. Would you give me a break and slow down a little bit so, I have a chance?" So that's when I was kind of the co-pilot from hell, as I describe myself, because, I was going over things so fast that I was kind of shutting the captain out. Well, okay. All things come around, I guess you'd say. Well, I'd been involved with the ALPA work on a bunch of safety stuff, flight test stuff, and yeah, I'd flown the Airbus, a number of them in flight test stuff, so I was familiar with the aircraft basically, and I wasn't too worried about it, but I hadn't got into the books very much. And I come into training and I'm sitting there and they're asking questions and I hadn't read that part. I didn't know. I felt kind of stupid. Usually I'm much more prepared going through training, but I'm sitting there and, finally they ask a question. I go, oh, I know the answer to that one. And I said what the answer was. And the instructor said, no, that's not right. And then Steve pipes up with the other answer. And I go, that's the answer? And he goes, yeah, boss. And I go, where is that? He goes, well, that's in the bulletins. And I go, bulletins? I haven't even read the manual and you're into the bulletins? He laughed. Well, see, this is the thing. So as a joke, I had him sign this picture of the co-pilot from hell because I was getting, turnaround is fair play sort of thing here. But when you are Thunderbird lead, you got to be good. You've got a reputation and that's going to follow you wherever you go. So, if you got that sort of reputation, people expect a lot out of you and you got to be on your toes. So he had no other choice but to be good. And I must admit, yeah, he flew the airplane very well. You'd expect that, right? Thunderbird lead. The only time I actually did a little bit better than Steve was on an approach to a landing on what's known as manual law, I guess. It's where the only thing you've got is a powered rudder and trimming stabilizer. And I actually did a better job of getting the airplane on the ground than Steve did. Now, I must admit that I had a little bit of an advantage because I had actually done that in the real airplane in flight test. So I had seen it before where we were just kind of getting it for the first time. Well, let's talk about this accident. That's the whole point of the thing here. And it's kind of interesting because I fly aerobatics and I set in my Great Lakes and I set my altimeter to field elevation, QFE. I'm sitting there on the ground and I zero it out to 0. So I always know my height above the ground because per FARs, I don't have any of these low altitude waivers. I wasn't an air show pilot. So I don't have the low altitude waivers. So I have to keep 1,500 feet as my minimum altitude. So I have to be aware of that when I'm doing the maneuvers. And I've got my G5 in it. It's a biplane, but it's got a few niceties in it. And I set that to QNH. Height above mean sea level. So if I talk to anybody like, any approach control, I can give them my true altitude because they're expecting mean sea level altitude, not altitude above the ground, which is pretty meaningless. But for flying aerobatics, you got that. Now, they had made, or Captain Strickland is faulted as making an error in the calculation of doing the split S. But apparently they had all this reference to MSL and gosh, that's not the way you typically do it. I don't know if they still do it that way or how they do it, but that's not really the way you should do it. And I don't think there's any airshow pilot who does it that way. But what he did was he incorrectly climbed to 1,670 feet above the ground level instead of 2,500 feet before he entered the split S there. Now, split S, that's a fun maneuver. Here's an example of one. What you do is you take and you roll the aircraft inverted, then you do a half loop and you pull out. And this is, it was first developed in World War II as a tactical maneuver, and it's kind of what you'd call a sucker maneuver, because where you try to employ this is where you're in a situation where you can make the split S and come out above ground level, but the guy pursuing you can't. And he has a tendency to roll in on you and follow you. And this worked very well in the Korean War when we had initially P-51s over there before they got the F-86s, but I think it probably was used there also. But we got the P-51s and they'd get jumped by the MiGs. Well, the MiGs, of course, is a faster, more superior aircraft. highly maneuverable if you've been up to air show, up to Oshkosh and seen the air show up there and the MiG-15 flights and all the various MiGs that they demonstrate very maneuverable aircraft. But these MiGs would come in on the P-51s and the guys would see them and they were at low altitude, so they'd just do a split S and they could do it in about, if I remember correctly, it's like 1,100 feet they could do it. But the MiG would be coming in at higher speed, and he starts going around, and he gets about to the vertical point, and he realizes this isn't going to work, which is kind of what happened to the Thunderbird pilot. Of course, you put the MiGs into the ground, and you get an easy kill without even firing your gun. But what happened here was he made an altitude error, and by the time he realized it, of course, it was too late, and he ended up punching out and destroying at the time they listed it as $20.4 million. But that's the basic cost of the airplane. When you consider how much work and paint goes into the paint job they put on those things, don't let me burst your bubble here, but most military aircraft are not as sleek and shiny as what you see at the air show with the Thunderbirds. Now, I'm going to show you a little video here so you can follow along and basically not talk too much during it. The Thunderbird lead does he talks you through maneuver. Now, when you fly formation in the Air Force, you got lead and you got your guys on the wing. And the guys on the wing, they just follow lead. And whatever he does, you do. You kind of got an idea of what's going on. And depending on what you're doing, he'll give you certain hand signals for maneuvers. But basically, he flies and you stay on his wing. Now, when you're doing an air show, you got to look good. Okay, so all the maneuvers are pre-planned. There's no surprise. It's like, what are we going to do next? Well, everybody knows what you're going to do next. But the lead talks, and you'll hear this in the video. He talks as you're coming in on the G, and you're coming in on the turn and stuff like that. Now, the other term you'll hear here after the crash is knock it off. That's an old fighter pilot term. It's used typically when you're doing practice maneuvers like air-to-air. If you get into a dangerous situation air-to-air and the training situation is over, basically, it's gotten unsafe, the term is knock it off. And you get safe and you break off what you're doing so the thing doesn't deteriorate into an accident. And of course, the other thing Steve told me about this: if you're a Thunderbird and you survive you survive an accident, you're done flying. And of course, Captain Strickland, he ended up standing next to the canopy there, and it's stated that he threw his helmet on the ground and walked over towards the wreckage because he knew his career was over. Oh, the other interesting thing is the photographer taking these pictures. You notice that the jet's it looks kind of like it's coming straight at him. Well, it pretty much is. And he was at the base of the tower, and he and a couple other guys ran around to the other side of the tower, and the wreckage stopped about 100 feet in front of the tower. The other thing is about this, and Steve told me about, and you may find this interesting if you've stuck around this long. A lot of the secretaries out at the hangar at Nellis, Thunderbirds have their own hangar, of course, as you could imagine. A lot of the secretaries don't like being there after dark because there's a lot of tales of the ghost of dead Thunderbird pilots coming into the hangar at night. And supposedly they don't like being around, and you can probably imagine. That's a ghost story for you involving the Thunderbirds, told to me by a former Thunderbird lead. So, okay, let's listen up on this, and you can hear the chatter. All right, so here we go. There's Thunderbird number 6 pulling up for the entry into the split S. Rolling into the split S, pulling it on through. Now there's a point where you can see the pitch rate increases when he realizes he's not going to make it. Right about there. Punches out and the wreckage goes over towards the tower. And here's the intro into the split S from the inside camera. And of course, 0.8 of a second before the crash, it ends. So it's a very quick sequence here. So this is the sad end to Thunderbird number 6, the wreckage in the hangar. Now, the Thunderbirds are the third oldest military demonstration group in the world. The French started out in 1931. The Blue Angels started out in 1946, and the Thunderbirds started out in 1953. There's an interesting little footnote that when they transitioned, probably the F-100s, and they're doing supersonic flight, they became the first supersonic aerial demonstration team. But in 1956, the FAA put it into that because they didn't like supersonic flight demonstrations. I guess they might have been a little bit noisy and damaging. So that's kind of an interesting tale there. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable.